Hello third year historians and welcome to lesson 4 of our mafia topic. Our last lesson was looking at the reasons why Italian people would have left to come from Italy to America. We're now looking at their lives in America and a little bit about the experiences they would have had once they'd immigrated. So our success criteria is just one thing that we're looking at with this lesson. We want to be able to explain the reasons why Italians were discriminated against in America and also the reasons how they were discriminated against, so what form this discrimination took when it was actually being applied to them. We're going to be using some primary sources to actually have a look at, so there's a lot of kind of small tasks to do, which involves you pausing the video and then going away and writing some stuff into your notes or into your jotter, wherever you're keeping your information at the moment. So, Italian immigrants on the boat coming into America, this is one of the first things that they actually get to see. Obviously it's the Statue of Liberty in the background there. Think about how the immigrants would have reacted seeing that. It's a symbol that their journey is over, but as far as they're also aware, the Statue of Liberty is supposed to stand for just that. It is all about liberty, it's about freedom. It makes them feel like they have actually made the right decision in leaving Italy to come to America on this. That's what the statue is actually representing for them. So they see this statue and they think that's it, their journey is over, but unfortunately for them it isn't quite over just yet. When they come into America, they are taken into Ellis Island, which is an American inspection area which had been set up by the American government to control immigration that was coming in. All immigrants coming in would go here first to be inspected before they were kind of released into the United States. This could be immediately if their papers were all in order and there was nothing wrong with them, but if medically they were thought to be unwell or anything like that, then they were kept for a period of time at Ellis Island. Conditions were very bare, not particularly great, and they'd be kept there for a little while before they would be then allowed to move on to America in general. Okay, so if you stop this video and have a look at the playlist or your instructions, you'll see a clip from quite a famous mafia-based film which shows a reenactment of what this would have been like. So arriving, seeing the Statue of Liberty, getting off at Ellis Island and what Ellis Island would have been like. So stop the video at 2 minutes and 55 seconds and then watch this YouTube clip. It takes about 3 minutes and then come back at around 2 minutes and 58. So hopefully you've watched that clip. If you haven't, I really strongly recommend that you go back and you watch it. It's only a couple of minutes long. It's really, really good. It shows you some really nice examples of how this whole affair would have worked on Ellis Island, from arriving on the boats and things as well. It also shows you some of the difficulties some of the immigrants maybe would have faced. So once they pass their checks at Ellis Island, they get onto the mainland. That's it. They've managed to get to America. They've done the whole goal of what they were trying to do. So what's their next steps going to be? They have to get a job. The whole point of them coming to America, remember, was to escape from the conditions, the poverty, the fear, the natural disasters, all these things, and to get employment in America, to seek the American dream. Now, not all Italian people that came to America actually intended to stay there. They came originally just so that they would make enough money, return to Italy and then be able to buy a piece of land on their own that they could then farm or do whatever with, and that was what their kind of job would be for. So they'd make that money, save it up and then go back to Italy. And roughly about 35% of Italian people actually returned within 5 years. For other people, they obviously would be working. Some of them would be sending money back to family in Italy if their family hadn't already joined them, or that would be what they were sending the money to do so that their family could afford a ticket to come and join them as soon as they could. There was a lot of young single Italian men who came with that particular plan, sending money back to their family, and roughly in the kind of 1890s they were sending about $20 million a year home, and that was to try and either bring their family over or to give their family some income that they could then use to buy land or to just support themselves while younger members of their family were off working in America, and that was quite a common thing. So what we're going to do now is you're going to imagine that you're an Italian immigrant, you've arrived in America, you're looking for work. We've got some examples of newspapers, posters, other advertisement, roughly from about 1883 to 1910, and all I want you to do in your notes or wherever you're doing this is think about what you can actually see. If you were looking for a job, what could you tell about the job or about America and how your people were being viewed based on these adverts? So this is number 1, mine workers. Okay, they want people who are familiar with soft coal mines, no coloured people or Italians need apply. So it then gives you more information about where you would be, how you could apply, where you could apply, what jobs you could actually do. But again, if you're an Italian person looking at this particular advert, you can't apply for this because no coloured people or Italians. So you're immediately discriminated against for this job. Okay, advert number 2 in the Buffalo Courier, wanted, good steady barber. Okay, so not bad if you have that particular skill. Wages $15 straight or 13.5 over 19. That's good pay. Steady place, so that means it's someplace it's always going to be. Looks great, no Italians. So again, everything looking good up to that point. No Italian people allowed to apply for this one either. No reason why, just they don't want Italian immigrants to apply for this job, so you wouldn't be able to get this job. Okay, number 3, no Italians allowed immediately before they've actually even got to anything else. So on May 28, 1888, the council passed a resolution to the effect that parties receiving the contract for paving E Washington Street shall bind themselves not to employ any Italian labour. So basic labour, trained, unskilled people could even go do basic labour, but they're not allowed to apply for this particular job either because the council has decided no Italians. Okay, for this one, wanted, 40 labourers, so they need a lot of people obviously for whatever reason. Good wage, so 2.25, 9 hours, night shift, start work at 4:30. Only Americans, Scandinavians, Irish, English or Germans need apply. So this means that if you are Italian, this job is not for you. The next one's from the Evening News. Wanted, boy 18 years old, so that's good if you're a young Italian immigrant, to engage in grocery, must have experience in bookkeeping, so not everybody would be able to do that. Good references required, 1 willing to work, no Catholics. That puts you completely out because the Italians were Catholic at this point in time, so they couldn't do this job either. Okay, next one, barber. So again, a good one. Wanted, first class, steady, sober, neat, tidy, young barber, steady work. References are required, no Italians or Hebrews. So again, you're not able to apply for this one either. This one immediately, Italians not wanted. Again, it's for coal mining. And it actually starts talking about how you're putting people off using Italian labour. So again, not one for you. So basically based on this, what we can see is that it was actually very difficult for an Italian person coming to America to achieve the American dream. They weren't able to actually get a job because most of them said no Italians. However, not all Italians actually did struggle to get jobs. A lot of them did. But many of them did make enough money to go back home and buy land and property, or made enough money to have a decent living in America. Mostly they worked low-skilled jobs, and many Americans then wouldn't obviously do these jobs, so it was the ones that were left over that would not or could not be filled by American people or others that they then did. However, a lot of the early immigrants did face quite a lot of prejudice and a lot of racism in America, not just the Italians, but the Italians were one group in particular that did face quite a lot of this prejudice. Again, if we're looking at primary sources, this cartoon from 1903 if you think about what it's actually showing you, what does it tell you about the American attitudes towards immigration at this point in time? So we have Uncle Sam over here, who represents the American people. So this is him here. And the sea is sort of swerving and starting to erode away at the American ideas and institution, which is the Rock. And the sea is made up of all these immigrants, a riff-raff of immigration. So you can kind of see the people and things like that, and they're very stereotypical. The Italians are wearing hats that say Italians and things like that. Some of them are wearing headbands that say things like mafia and things. So very stereotypical, and they're trying to erode away at what the American ideas are supposed to be. This one, again, Uncle Sam trying to defend the shores from these rats, and you can see here the mafia hat and things like that. Slums of Europe, depositing them in. They're coming in, they're obviously socialists, they're carrying weapons, knives and guns. You can see Uncle Sam's trying to defend America from them. In the background we've got a ghost of one of the presidents who was actually killed by an immigrant, so makes it out that they are violent and aggressive. Okay, we see these things that we're looking at here. Meanwhile, the Italian people who were actually managing to sort of get some level of American dream situation in their lives are setting up places where they can feel like they don't have to be worried about how American people are going to treat them. And this was a good thing in a lot of ways, but also a bad thing. Because the Italian people felt that they were being persecuted quite a lot by Americans who were seeing these newspapers and seeing these sort of things, they tended to stay together in their own kind of little communities, and they would buy shops and buy housing and things like that in their little communities and stay together there. So this is one example in New York of Little Italy. It was in Mulberry Street on the Lower East Side, and you can see here that these people are obviously together, and this meant that they felt safer and protected. On the other side of that, because they were doing this and they were staying together like this, it meant that the Americans thought they didn't want to mix, that they thought they were better than American people, and it made a lot of Americans quite angry. So there would sometimes be quite a lot of violence and things on the streets and things like that. But it did give the Italian people some place to open their own businesses and to maybe start to pursue this American dream a little bit further. So, key point that we're looking at is how the Italians were discriminated against in America, because we know they were. We're looking for kind of just bullet point lists. So can you put the thing of the title from the yellow box into your notes or your jotter, wherever you're writing this down, and we're just going to take some key points from this slide. So they were discriminated in with jobs. So even though they'd proved themselves hard-working as any other immigrant group at this time, they were not given the same opportunities, and they had to settle for the lowest paid unskilled jobs. So for this one, you could maybe just, even if we highlight some key points, we could say that they were discriminated in jobs, and we could just say not given the same opportunities, so that key point there, and then having to settle for the lowest paid unskilled jobs, and that's our key point from that one there. Quite often this had to deal with police brutality. They were often dealt with more harshly and often blamed for crimes as the kind of ones that we want in there. So just that bit we've put in yellow. So dealt with more harshly by police and blamed for crimes, even if there wasn't evidence that they'd actually committed them. In terms of housing, because of a lack of money in general, they were forced into the poorest areas of the city, and that led to problems with overcrowding and diseases and things like that spreading between those particular groups. Okay, so housing is your third one there that we're putting in. The major question that we have to think about is why. Why were they discriminated against? We've seen them being discriminated in employment, we've seen them being discriminated against for certain areas of that they were allowed to work and even live. Why is it that they're being discriminated against? So in the next couple of slides, we're going to just look at a cartoon from a New Orleans newspaper in 1888. And I want you just to think about how does it describe the Italians, and then just write down any ideas you've got as we kind of have a look. So the first one here, we can see 3 things regarding the Italian population. Okay, so they're a nuisance to pedestrians, so you can see them lying around in the street and things like this, or in shop corners, or just basically lazing about in the streets, not doing anything. They're sleeping apartments, so this is like 5 or 6 people, maybe even more than that, in one room, which is overcrowded. They're obviously not really caring, they're not polite society people, they're just piling it into this room, dirty sort of conditions, overcrowding, not great. And then we've got afternoons, pleasant diversions, so basically then when they're not sleeping in the streets or sleeping in their overcrowded bits, they're out in the streets causing mayhem, fighting, they're stabbing each other, shooting each other, basically just committing crimes, stealing, thieving, in general not being particularly upstanding members of the American situation. Okay, they're not good members of society as far as this newspaper is concerned. So this list again gives you a bit more information about why they were being discriminated against, so we're just going to write down these key points in the red boxes. So they were viewed as being very alien, very different to American people. They were not like the civilised Americans. They were Catholic, which again was worse, superstitious, sort of people thought that this was a danger to the Protestant Christian ways of America at this point in time. Catholicism was not considered to be the American religion, so dangerous. Their culture, everything about their culture, the food, the way they look, the way they spoke, the behaviour, so the stereotype we just saw there in that newspaper as them being lazy, they were rowdy or violent in the streets, they were hot-tempered. All of these things were very un-American, uncivilised, so the culture in general was just not something that the Americans liked. Because of their education, it was very poor quality. Only 50% actually had basic literacy, so they were seen as stupid, or they were just seen as unwelcome and uncivilised. Politics and law, they were accused of making up their own rules and their own systems. Quite a lot of the time, this is a kind of overlay from their life in Sicily. If you remember back to those lessons we were talking about, when they felt like they couldn't actually go to the police or that they were being persecuted by the police, they went to their own sort of mafia people living in Italy, in Sicily, who would then take care of the situation for them. And this is what starts to happen in America. Because they're facing this discrimination, they do start to take things into their own hands. At first it's off with these little areas or places where Italians are living. If someone commits a crime there, rather than contact the police, they'd be more likely to contact one of the Italian people living there that had more authority than others did, and it would be them that took care of it. And this is where we start to see the rise of the mafia being more common and more used by the Italian people to deal with their problems. So the major thing was here, they said that Italian people basically couldn't assimilate. So the word there we use to mean become part of America. They couldn't take in and understand and follow what was considered the normal social and cultural American way of life. They were trying too hard to keep their stereotypically bad Italian culture, and this made American people feel really angry and very upset with them, so they didn't want them there. So pause the video, take a second to add this bit of information to your list of reasons why they were being discriminated against and how they were being discriminated against, and then come back to the video at 19 minutes and play the rest. There was also stereotypes that Italians were organ grinders, so they bust for their money rather than getting real jobs. Again, we can go just through this and you can see the newspapers and the cartoons from the time that are showing these things, and you can add them to your list as we go. Again, stereotype of Italians being seen as organ grinders, but also the suggestion that they made their money from dishonest means, so you could add dishonest means for making money. This one's quite an interesting one. This is supposed to be the Pope is the Catholic sort of person in charge of the Catholic Church, and here the bishops and the Catholic sort of hats are the crocodiles who are a danger to the good Christian people of the American people standing here. Again, this is showing about the whole fear of the religion influencing the destruction of the American ideals because they thought they were superior to these other groups. This one's making fun of their way of speaking, about their food, about garlic and how them smelling of garlic and things like that, the clothes that they wore, all the things that they did were like menial tasks, so they were kind of low-level people, not really important people. So now we're going to look at the second half of the cartoon from the New Orleans newspaper. Okay, and we can see the first half told you what people thought about Americans, and these two ways are showing you what they actually thought about how to get rid of them. So we've got the way to dispose of them, put them all into a cage and drop them into the sea, and then we've got the way to arrest them. Basically just run them all over, beat them and drag them off is what's happening there. So this kind of shows that American people thought that the only way to deal with these people was through violence, and this was what the media was kind of showing them, and we've seen that through all of these cartoons and things like that. They were stereotypically made fun of and definitely not something that they wanted to have in America. So these are the two together, and you can see them there. If you think about the effect that media has today, think about the coronavirus and the COVID media things that we see. Masks are an excellent example about anti-masking and how people think masks are not working, people think that they are. Even if you look at politics, about how governments across the world are dealing with this, or even recently with the American government changing leaders and things like that, you can see how media can actually influence people quite a lot. Today we have social media and things like that which does this quite effectively as well, but at this point in time the newspapers and things showing the readers this constantly, the cartoons, the stereotypes, would make them start to think that that is the way that Italian people actually were. So this leads to further discrimination, which is very similar to what we saw happening in our Right Through Time topic when we were looking at other people in America at this time. So, quick story on this. Okay, so whilst the cartoon, although racist, may seem quite harmless, the reality was really much different from this. Okay, you don't have to write anything on this, we're just looking through this. So just 6 months after this cartoon was printed, 11 Italian people were killed in the biggest mass lynching that America has ever had. So the 15th of October, 1890, New Orleans Police Chief David Hennessy was shot by several gunmen as he walked home from work. Hennessy returned fire and chased his attackers before he eventually collapsed. When he asked who had shot him, he reportedly whispered to Captain William O'Connor, the person who was in charge of the investigation, "Daugos," which was a derogatory term for Italians and others of Mediterranean heritage at this point in time. So in New Orleans, there were 2 Italian families who had rival businesses at this point in time. The police chief had been responsible for the arrest of Italians who were part of and worked for these families. There were rumours that then started in the press that Hennessy had evidence for an upcoming trial which was going to put members of one of the families in jail for a very long time. And this was said to be the reason why he was gunned down and attacked, to stop him going to trial with this particular evidence. And this is the first example we can see in record of someone being taken out almost by one of these major families that start to emerge. As a result of this, 45 Italians were arrested within 24 hours and 19 of those went on trial for the murder or aiding the murder of the police chief, because he did die from his injuries. The jury decided that there was not enough evidence, however, to convict any of the Italians. The members of the jury were given abuse for not convicting them, and some even lost their jobs as a result of it, but there wasn't enough evidence. Disgusted at this decision, a mob of what we think now was about 20,000 people turned up to the courthouse where the 19 Italians were still inside. A battering ram was then used to break down the door. 11 of the 19 were found. They'd been released obviously from their cells by a prison warden when the mob started to break in, and they'd been told to hide. One of the people that we have as an eyewitness at this point in time, a young man called Emmanuel, he was a street vendor. He was hauled outside, hanged from a lamppost, and then shot. Another, Antonio, who was a fruit peddler, was hanged from a tree and shot. 9 others were shot or clubbed to death inside the prison. And the bullet-riddled bodies were left hanging for hours as a kind of a message from the American people about what actually would happen if they didn't do what they wanted. 10 of these 11 men were born in Sicily, and the one other was of Sicilian descent. In the aftermath of this, the reason that they gave for the killings being fair and necessary was because they, as American people, were defending America and the justice system from the mafia. However, on the other side, the Italian community, seeing this, especially the ones from Sicily, because obviously that's one of the major places where the mafia starts from, then took it on themselves to start to seek revenge. Or at least that's the story. The New York Times then wrote a small piece about justifying this mass lynching. We're going to use this source in a minute for an inquiry skills question. They said, "These sneaking and cowardly Sicilians, the descendants of bandits and assassins who have transported to this country the lawless passions, the cutthroat practices and the oath-bound societies of their native country, are to us a pest without mitigation." Basically, they blame the lynchings on the violence and the stereotypical violent nature of the Italian people, even though the violence actually came from the Americans at this point in time. So nobody was arrested for these lynchings. 8 more men of Italian descent were lynched in Louisiana during that period of time. And it wasn't until 2019 that the city of New Orleans made an official apology for these lynchings, which is about 138 years after the event, saying that it was unlawful and shouldn't have happened. In the direct aftermath of this, for the very first time in an American newspaper, one word was printed: mafia. Mafia families, and the mafia started to become more of a thing. Why that might be, a lot of historians have debated this, but the argument is because of the discrimination and because they felt like they weren't being listened to, and the brutality from the police officers and then the reactions from the American people, they had to have the mafia present in order to protect themselves and their families. So, task for this lesson is for you to complete a How Fully question, which is a National 5 skill, remember. So we've got this source again from the New York Times. It's a How Fully question. So how fully does the source explain why Italians were discriminated against? So it's asking you to look for reasons that explains why the Italians would have faced this discrimination. As a reminder, when we're answering these questions, we use aid. So the first thing that we have to do is answer the question. We always start it with a sentence that says something like, the source quite fully explains or describes, and then takes some bits from the question but misses out some points, or not totally, or it quite fully explains it, and then leave it at that. We're then looking for 3 things that the source says, so 3 quotes. So the source says, and a quote, and I can explain it if I want to, or I can just leave it as a quote. And then the source doesn't include. So 3 things that I know from the information in this lesson that is not in that source. So if we have a look at this. Okay, so here's our question again. I've highlighted here, you can see this is what the question's actually asking you. Why Italians were discriminated against is the question, so we're going to use that in our answer. Okay, the first sentence that we're going to write. So it's going to just be like this. So the source quite fully explains why Italians were discriminated against. Okay, and then I could add but not totally, or I can just leave it like that. I've made my answer. I now then need to move on to my next point, which is the I for includes. So what I've done here then is I've gone back and I'm looking for any reasons that might explain why they were discriminated against. So this first bit here I've put in yellow, so these sneaking and cowardly Sicilians, the descendants of bandits and assassins. So that's one reason. They thought that they were the descendants of bandits and assassins. So that would be my first quote. I then like this one in green, so transported to this country the lawless passions and the cutthroat practices, so the lawlessness and the cutthroat practices is another reason they were discriminated against, so I've highlighted that too. And then the last bit down here in blue, they're a pest without mitigation, so they're a pest, so they're discriminated against because people think of them as being pests. So these are my 3 quotes that I'm going to use. Okay, I've highlighted these and I need to put them into the correct structure. So again, remember we've got our answer sentence, okay, because remember we're using aid. So this is our answer point here. Okay, and I now need to put an include. And it's really simple, really easy. All I need to do is say the source says and put my first quote. So the source says, and there's my first quote there. I could then explain it if I want to, but I don't have to just now. Okay, but it is good practice to maybe try that. And then do it again. The source also says, and I've got my quote. And then one last time, and the source says, and I've got my quotes there as well. So this is my what the source includes section. Okay, and that gets me my first 3 marks. I need another 3 marks, so I need to say 3 things that the source doesn't say. And I start it off really easily by saying, however, the source doesn't explain everything. And then I'm going to give a point. So it misses out that Americans thought Italian culture was very alien and were against it as a result. So that's my first thing that I'm going to say. And you can use this one if you like. I then need to include another 2. So the source also didn't mention, and I could talk about the religion here, it didn't mention that Catholic people were seen as something Americans didn't want, and many Italian people were Catholic, and I add that bit in. Finally, the source should be didn't say, and I add something else in, so it could be something about their education, it could be something about the overcrowded conditions they lived in, it could be something about anything that we've talked about in this lesson, it could be about how they dressed, how they spoke, anything like that. So you're going to pick another 2 things to add in there, and this is my doesn't include or didn't say section to make up my aid. So our answer, the 3 things the source says, and then I need 3 things the source doesn't. So I've started the question off for you. Okay, all you need to do is finish it off with 2 other things from the notes and submit this in the assignment tab. Finished, so copy and complete it. So copy the first bit and complete it and submit it in your assignment tab. Any questions or anything that you're not sure about, you can check out the how to answer how fully link as well in the videos list from YouTube, or you can ask questions in your team channel.